What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Payton Collier podcast. My next guest is a guitar virtuoso, well known for his mastery of all styles of picking and grinning. He grew up playing bluegrass music on the mandolin, and by the time he was 18, he began to transfer his supersonic speed and technique to the electric guitar. These days, he spends his time bringing his creations to life as a solo artist, as well as a touring guitarist for Gary LeVox and Rascal Flatts, all while building and maintaining his online community of aspiring shredders in the woodshed. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Andy Wood. What is up, brother?
Payton, cheers. Good to be here. I'm gonna come
Cheers to you, man. Just a couple guys and four roses.
If that's not your opening line from here on out, it should be. It's really good.
Just a couple of dudes and four roses.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming into the studio today. I'm absolutely stoked to have you here. You've been at Soundcheck here in Nashville all day. Sound checking. Rehearsing.
Yeah.
For the Gary LeVox shows, right?
Yeah, right there next to that ever ominous river where everyone looks at it with just a little bit different perspective now, you know.
I'm not a Nashville native. What's the ominous river?
So the ominous river is the one that flooded Soundcheck and destroyed tons and tons of priceless gear, including some of Vince Gill stuff, Brad Paisley stuff.
Oh no.
So for those that don't know, I'll do the background history on it.
Let's hear about these.
So Soundcheck is basically just a big row of warehouses, and that's where not everyone, but a lot of super famous people do their tour prep. That you can rent the rooms just to do rehearsals for your bar band if you want to, but some of the giant rooms have, I think by the time this airs, they won't be there. So I'll go ahead and say it. Yeah. Robert Plant and Alison Krauss are next door to us doing their show. So it's a really legendary place to go. And they also have rooms that are essentially glorified closets where they're just storage rooms. So people that store their, lighting truss or, set carts or whatever, all the way up to like instruments and drums and stuff. So people buy lockers and they just constantly rent them. For instance, Vince Gill, and he had a bunch of stuff over there. It's pretty priceless. Brad Paisley. So the river runs right next to Soundcheck. So when it flooded in 2000 and whatever year that was, that flood, it destroyed a lot of 50s tellies and things that we would not want destroyed. So when I say the ever ominous river, if you know about the Nashville flood, then you know. But if you don't know, now you know, and I've wasted 6 minutes of your life.
No, dude, I needed to know that. Anybody that's a gear nut, anybody that's a guitar person is going to shed a tear at the thought of a Vince Gill
losing
telecast that he
or
even
whatever.
Touched.
Yeah, it was really crazy. And if you ever drive by there, it's like over there close to where the stadium is, Nissan Stadium and stuff. And if you're ever over there, if you've seen it or not, it's just it's giant. So you think about it flooding, and that river had to be,
Dude, Nashville gets some crazy weather. It rains 65% of the time.
Yeah, and it seems like, I don't know, climate change, whatever it could be. But tornadoes have been super bad over the past decade. It wasn't maybe 6-8 months before COVID hit. Do you start saying BC before COVID?
Yeah.
I don't know, pre-C. But anyways, right before COVID, there was a really horrible run of tornadoes ripped up Nashville, and a lot of things got damaged. But yeah, the weather here is kind of crazy. That's why I choose to stay in Knoxville. It's a little further east. It's a little more orange there.
Yeah, dude. So, how long have you been doing the Gary thing?
So Gary, I guess it's more about the history into flats, because I was playing with those guys 15 and just a minute of 16. I actually got hired in 14. I think we auditioned right before Christmas or something of 14. Then I did 15 with them, and just right into 16. And then they switched the show again in 16. And then they kept, when I was with them, it was a giant band. So I played utility. I played mandolin, electric, acoustic, bouzouki. And then, as any artist does, they changed the shows around. So the next year they did a tour that was the Back to Us tour, I think it was called. And it was all stripped down. So none of the additional cats like me, or the female background singers that they had, or another guy named Tom Yankton was on the gig with me. And then outside of that, Life happens and played music outside of flats, but occasionally I would get to do a random project with those guys. They were all very kind and like, we're not firing you. We just don't have your position. It's like, cool. We'll call you when we need stuff. I thought that was like, that's the end, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't. Like I got to do a really fun one that was with Jay DeMarcus, who was bass player, the black-headed guy from Flats. And the session was for a movie. And I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of the Sharknado type films, right? Where they're like super cheesy, campy kind of. Yeah. So he did.
Familiar.
Okay, so check this out. You're going to like this. It was a wrestling event where one of the wrestlers takes steroids and the steroids turn him into a zombie. And that's the plot of the movie. So then the zombie outbreak happens at this wrestling event. Jay hits me up, and apparently he's done soundtracks for several of these movies. And Jay's like, hey, man, I need like 7-string, Rage Against the Machine, like all that kind of industrial stuff. Go, bring one of your metal amps and come into the studio and let's just have some fun. So it's like the first film score I got to play on, and it was really interesting because you'll have a whole Logic session open up and you're not to a grid. He's like, all right, when this guy punches this guy in the face,
really nothing.
There's no, so you can see the grid, and I'll be like, all right, bring me in at like bar 132. And he's like, yeah, it's not when it happens. So they have the movie playing in the background and you sync it up to that. So yeah, it's an interesting way to do it, but it's the way that you make movie soundtracks, right? So I did that one with Jay. And then Gary had wanted to do a worship. I hate using that word because it's not really worship. It just sounds like, a little more, how some of the Rascal Flatts tunes have a little more religious overtones to them, like Broken Road or whatever. So Gary had always wanted to do like a solo record that was like a little more worshipy, I guess, for like a better term. And again, with like the COVID thing, he was like, well, this is a great opportunity. We're not going to be touring because everybody's stuck at home. He makes the record. And then it all started with a gig at the Ryman that we were going to do where instead of it being a gig with an audience, because we're in COVID, right? It was a gig where we filmed backwards and you actually filmed to all the empty pews and the stained glass. And it was me and Travis Toy on dobro, Mike Hicks on piano, and Jim Riley on like a hand percussion kind of kit. And it was all really acoustic. There was no like electric instruments or whatever. That was kind of like the first thing that Gary did. And then it just kind of spiraled. And now we're at the point where it's like full production and all this stuff.
Was there a moment where he latched onto you where he's like, man, Andy, I really like what you're doing there on that guitar.
2015, right? Yeah, that was the thing is like when we all had a good time. I really enjoyed my time with.
When you were playing Bouzouki?
That was one song, but no, we would go to the front of the stage and have fun, and like Joe Don is a mega guitar nerd too. So like, it was really fun. That was a really comforting thing that I'll never forget was like when I walked in to audition, it's like we're auditioning with, however many people. Joe Don just kind of leans over to me after I got him playing. He's like, man, I love your stuff. I've got your album. You sound great. I was like, oh, sweet. So like when we got together, it was like we nerded on guitar stuff. So I loved all those guys and just glad that when it came back around that for a movie or a solo tour or whatever, I'm just glad I get to hang out with them and keep doing stuff together, right? Like we're all just big music nerds. Jay's a Star Wars nerd. Joe Don's a Star Wars nerd. So like we all like the same.
That's probably really why you got in the band.
It's really the truth.
Had nothing to do with the Bouzouki solos.
Yeah. So here's the funny thing about the Bouzouki. This is for the guitar nerds, right? It's just for the gear nerds. Bouzouki, traditionally, obviously being a Greek instrument, it's got a really unique tuning.
Yeah, so obviously, everybody, if you don't...
With the word bouzouki, right? Like it's almost tzatziki, but it's not, It's
a type of sauce.
It's almost a sauce. So Phil X is a really famous guitar player, plays with Bon Jovi. He's got a lot of the Greek heritage, and he's got a tuning that he uses for guitar that like turns it pseudo bouzouki, right? I'm a mandolin player, and so I look up online what the actual tuning is, and I forget what it is, but bouzouki is not tuned in anything that I like the way it plays. So I just took the whole thing and tuned it like octave mandolin. So I learned the bouzouki part to play it like a mandolin. Just random knowledge on if you saw me playing that thing on one song. I was not playing it in proper tuning. I was playing it where I like to drive.
I just wonder how many dudes are like nearest bouzouki eBay pickup.
Yeah. But the nature of Nashville over the past 15 years, there's been a lot of that like major hook to a song having some kind of texture that's just not another electric guitar or another if it is, it's filtered in some way. Even steel guitarists are using like Travis Toy is a great steel guitar player I talk about a lot. He'll use like an EBO or use different effects. It's like something happened 15 years ago and everybody was like looking for like texture instead of just more traditional sounding instruments, right?
I think I saw an EBO for the first time at a TSO Trans-Siberian Orchestra concert when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I remember,
wild.
Yeah. I was probably, 11 or 12 when because they do it every year.
So this was like 3 years ago.
Oh yeah, right. Of course. Yeah. You were in these shoes not too long ago. You're like the you're a new age guitar hero. You're like guitar hero of the internet,
Of the internet. The internet is my biggest fan.
No, I'm saying but the vessel is so unique because
It's just a platform.
In 80s it was being in Guns N' Roses, which we both dude. Okay.
We showed up at the same time. We're in the same band, and I was like,
same car.
Yeah, same car.
Shirt.
Like, what is happening? We both looked at each other like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly in Step Brothers.
Oh yeah, first
they're just staring at each other. Did you touch my drums?
I love the tension at the beginning of that before they become best friends.
Yeah, it's good.
Before we get off Gary though, dude, I got to ask you this just because you work in his camp. What golden nectar, butterous honey from Texas Roadhouse is that man's voice made out of? No, it doesn't sound like anybody else's voice.
Yeah, the interesting thing
especially
is
for a white man.
Yeah, because he's got the soulful thing. He's got this like really hip soulful thing. The interesting thing is I just knew going into the gig that Gary was going to be like, don't talk to me 3 hours before the gig. There's going to be on the voice rest today, blah, blah, blah. And he's like really catered to, not even close. That guy drinks Mountain Dew as he's going on stage. And there's no like warm up times. Mm-hmm. Like one of the interesting things, I was called in at the last minute to like sub out a gig for Sebastian Bach. And Sebastian still takes a lot of care in his voice. It's still like these warm up things, right? Like give him his time to warm up before the show to hit the screeching high parts. I'm telling you, like when I saw Gary for the first time at my audition, I walked in and he had a dip in and he had a Mountain Dew, like Diet Mountain Dew bottle. And I was like, oh man, that's kind of sucks. This is probably my one chance I'm going to get to hear this guy in the room, not through a microphone, and he's going to phone it in, right? He's not trying. Oh no, he took the dip out, put it in what was left of the Mountain Dew and started singing What Hurts the Most. And I was just like, Jesus, it's like right there. It's just available. You just go to the shelf and take it off the shelf and you have the voice. I wish there was some kind of secret sauce or warm-up routine. No, not even close.
It sounds like he's just constantly drinking milk and honey.
Not even close. I'm surprised he drinks water.
I love Mountain Dew. I've got the fridge stocked full of Mountain Dew, and I'm like, I've been thinking, man, I'm probably having too much sugar. I'm gonna have kidney stones one day. No way, baby. I'm keeping the Mountain Dews, and every time I pull one out and crack a tab, I'm going, Gary LeVox.
Yeah.
Gary LeVox.
You start automatically singing Fast Cars and Freedom.
Yeah, which is my favorite one.
Oh, nice.
Because I love what a unique. It's not a time meter change, but it's a rhythmic change in the chorus there that's so unorthodox for popular country music.
Yeah, like really slick punches. Yeah. It reminds me of like the Mutt Lange, Def Leppard, even like the David Foster kind of Chicago things. I know Jay's a big fan of that stuff, but I know Gary was a writer on that. Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the other writer was a guy named Neil Thrasher on that song. But yeah, it's got some just really clever little moves in it. And I think that's what's really rewarding about the gig. Luckily, I've been like #blessed or whatever you want to call it, to where it's a point now where it's like, I just can take the gigs that I want to take, and that gig is so musically fulfilling that I just want to take it. All those Flats tunes have cool lead lines. Joe Don always wrote cool lead lines. The ones that Joe Don didn't play, it was Dan Huff playing, who was like literally one of my top 5 favorite guitar players of all time. Dan is one of the most sassy, just dripping with attitude kind of players. He's like one of my all-time favorite players. And so to get to like,
are you saying,
put on the jersey and play those solos, it's really like selfishly fun,
Yeah. Are you saying that like the kind of some of the musical movements were inspired by the Mutt Lange, Def Leppard stuff?
There's no way there's not, because they're too slick.
Yeah, so there's this one part in Photograph It's like when it's like, I want to touch you. But the drums, I think, hit the upbeat right before the guitars come. It's like, super nerding out. I hope that comes through on the audio version of the podcast.
Yeah, it was perfectly in tune. It's pitch perfect to the key and everything. It's amazing. Exactly. How'd you do that?
Yeah, dude.
Mountain Dew? Was it the Mountain Dew?
Dude, you have no idea how you keep that fridge stocked with Mountain Dew. You'll be playing Rascal Flats before you know it. But dude, so you were out in Vegas recently, at a race school. And you're a huge car and motor guy.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to like actually go out to Vegas and learning at that level?
It was it's a funny story. My dad got me into cars when I was about 16, and through my early 20s, I kept saving up for this Toyota Supra. For those that are children of the 80s, you'll know that it's the Fast and Furious. It's the orange car. I was obsessed with that car long before that movie happened. And my dad was like, why do you want a Toyota? You should get something fast. And he didn't understand, he was old school, big block kind of guy. So anyways, my dad and I had always joked around. I would always make comments like, oh, I'm going to get one of these cars. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And he's like, yeah, whatever. So finally, some things kind of lined up and I was able to splurge and I bought one of the new mid-engine Corvettes, right? I've never been a domestic guy. I've always been way into imports. One of the things that GM has that's an interesting program is when you buy the new one of the new mid-engine ones, right? You can go out to a driving school in Spring Mountain in Nevada. So I told Dad that he passed away in the process. He got to see the car and stuff, but he never I didn't get the chance to tell him about the race school, right? But the school was tied to this GM program and trying to make the career, all the stuff that I'm doing, whether it be my solo stuff or the camp or touring, trying to find a window just to go sneak out and do race school. It's been really hard, right? But everything's been so busy. I had that one moment beginning of the year this year, and I was like, God, I gotta go. This is what I'm gonna just treat myself. I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna do it. So I spent 3 days out there and doing the school. The track is amazing, and if anybody has a chance to go out to Spring Mountain, it's a 9.5 mile track, and they can configure it into 100 and something 15 different configurations. I don't want to talk about racing for 2 hours. I easily could talk about racing in cars for 2 hours.
I'd be fine with it.
Long story short, it was I'm a hobby level driver at best. I know I'm not going to be Michael Schumacher or anything like that in my life or whatever.
Maybe a Tony Stewart though.
Yeah, I wish, man. These guys are monsters, right? But the interesting thing was to go out there and to be part of something knowing that I'm never going to be at that level. That was a nice juxtaposition to the event that I put on and in August, which is the Woodshed Guitar Experience, which is this exclusive 4-day guitar retreat. And you look around the room and the guys that are there is Robin Ford and Brent Mason and Joe Bonamassa. And this year we got Eric Johnson and Mark Lettieri and Andy Timmons. So it was interesting for me to go as a fan who's not a professional player, a professional driver, and get to experience something that you're passionate about, even though you're not going to be racing professionally. It gave me new perspective for what we do with Woodshed. And I was like, oh man, I've learned so much from just what it's like to be on the other side of it. I think I personally deal with a lot of imposter syndrome, right? People are like, oh, you're so good. You can do all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not really that good. If I can figure it out, anybody can, right? I beat myself up a lot. I'm a perfectionist, all the stereotypical, troubled artist, tropes. I've probably got them. And, I forget sometimes what it was like to be a hobbyist level guitarist. You know what I mean? Because we got guys that come to the camp that are not touring level, Mark Lettieri level players. These guys are, maybe they're young, 19, 20. Maybe they're guys that are in, law or a dentist or something like that. And they just play guitar for fun. And so going out there and being on the side of I can never race at that level, it gave me a nice perspective of guys that want to come to the event and they just want to be in a room with Brent Mason, knowing that that level of abilities out of reach, right? Because my thing with Woodshed and the whole thing is oh man, you can do it. You can do it. We don't ever take seconds to be like, I've been playing for 30 years. We never go, that guy's been playing for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing that was so beautiful about, even though it was not anything to do with music, it just, I have that passion of racing and cars. And I just know that it's like, just to be around people that are so great, you just want to learn a trick or two. And then that's like so rewarding, right?
Yeah.
Versus the way that I think a lot of guitarists and probably people that watch this podcast, guitarists, a lot of pro level players or people are aspiring to be pro level players are zeroing in and just taking things to the, I do this for 15 hours a day. We forget what it's like just to enjoy something for 30 minutes.
You were talking about imposter syndrome in the guitar community. You're Andy Wood, you're the guy.
Like even thinking
Right.
about that, even thinking about all the things that I've been so blessed with and like lucky with, it's just still weird. I'm just like, yeah, but I'm not that cool.
but I'm saying in like the racing school,
Yeah.
you get to show up, like you and I would be on the same playing field of like,
yes,
nobody more would be coming up to you and being like, dude, like I saw the woodshed this week. How'd you do that?
yeah.
So your camp that you put on, is it in August every year? It's in August this year, right?
It's haphazardly been in August for the past 4 years. This is year 4. We like August because the weather's nice. It's not brutal. It's still warm and we can do things outside at night and stuff but
for the people that don't know about it, where is it at? And
right. Okay. So like ground zero, the conversation, I guess, like it's a 4-day event in Crossville. And we've had it in August and it's a chance. It's all the master classes that you would expect. Basically we bring in about 6 or 7 elite level players. I host the event. And throughout the day, you'll learn from the players, whether that be about tone or chops or gear or all these different things. And then every night we'll have a live concert. And then after that live concert, we have jamming. So like, night, and I kind of theme it after my life a bit in that the first night is a bluegrass concert. I play predominantly mandolin and flat top and we have upright and play banjo, stuff like that. And then night 2, after all the classes during the day, night 2 we'll do all cover tunes. So it's kind of like a throwback to all the years I spent clubbing. And one of the things I love to do is not let any of the artists pick their tunes till we're on property. So we don't get to rehearse it. It's just like Andy Timmons will be like, let's play White Room or whatever.
Yeah.
And it did 1, 2, 3, go. Right. One that we did, I think we did Only Daddy or Honky Tonk Nighttime Man or something like that. And it's like Guthrie Trapp and Brent. And, it's just like all these cats just ripping.
Is this the first year Eric Johnson is going to be there?
So this year's a big year.
That's got to be big for you, right? I know he's your guy.
Well, I mean, it's like weird.
One of your guys.
I would say that I've got like 5 dudes when it comes to electric guitar. And Eric is one of those dudes. Brent's one of those dudes. And the event has been interesting because like, becoming friends and knowing your heroes better is also one of those surreal things. That's always like an odd
Who's
thing.
the other 3?
I would say Eric Johnson, Dan Huff, Brent Mason, Steve Morse, without even thinking and then I would say Eddie Van Halen. There's my 5 electric guitar players. With that said, it keeps splintering out because I would have Jeff Beck in there, and that could be on a Wednesday. Maybe Steve goes and Jeff Beck comes in, right? Or whatever. But those are the 5 that really got me excited about electric guitar when I first started. And so anybody that you would think that I listen to is probably a gateway drug from one of those guys, right? Like John Petrucci, Liquid Tension, Dream Theater. I found him from listening to Steve Morse.
Gotcha.
So like the reason it's never a skill thing that gets somebody in my top 5. It's like the 5 that I found everything else. I would have never found Jeff Beck if it wasn't for like Dan Huff.
Yeah. That's your Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. It's like, and then it's weird because like, if you made me make a musician's Mount Rushmore, I would have to choose from that because Bela Fleck is one of my biggest influences.
Yeah.
Sam Bush and Bela Fleck are like gigantic, massive influences. And honestly, most of the stuff that people like to talk to me about, which is picking technique, came from like bastardizing the banjo roll into various combinations of right hand technique. So yeah, that Mount Rushmore thing tends to be less of a who do I think is the best and more of like these guys let me find the others. Like discovering Jeff Beck from Dan Huff. Who's to say like that? That's what makes, outside of Dan being incredible for what he is, he let me find all these other things just from worshiping his playing. I don't think I would have found Mike Landau without listening to Huff.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Wherever
Thank you
you're
so
at.
much, Dan.
Wherever you're at. Brent Mason, Dan Huff.
Okay, so wait, so we got night 1 at the Woodshed is bluegrass.
Bluegrass, and night 2 is like the covers.
Club
and
night.
then like night 3 is like I'm gonna play Junktown and Forgotten Secrets and Reach and stuff. Brent's gonna play Hot Wired. It's like that's the quintessential signature.
Yeah.
Andy Timmons is gonna play Cry for You, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those kind of things. Not saying that that's the set list, but everybody plays like their signature stuff Saturday night. And then afterwards, that goes way into the mornings, is the jamming, right? So like if you want to play Superstition with Brent, you can. What's really fun is Mark Lettieri. If you don't know who he is, he's incredible. He's in Snarky Puppy. He's played with like Erykah Badu, and like he's just a monster. One of the funkiest living human beings on the planet. Mark Lettieri, go check him out if you haven't. He loves to play bass. So like when we start jamming, like he'll start playing bass, and like I looked up last year and they were playing like Metallica and Kickstart My Heart and all these like 80s rock tunes. Here Mark Lettieri is with a pick on the bass, just laying it down. And the funny thing is, he sounds so legit playing bass and playing 80s hair metal.
Yeah.
It's like, I was like, what's happening here? You know?
Dude, I love videos I see of Brent playing rock music or like yacht rock stuff.
Yeah.
When he goes down to Key West and he'll just play like a Michael McDonald song.
Just sitting in with the band or whatever.
Yeah.
It's so good. And that's the stuff that's so healthy, right? Like there's so many like offshoots of my life where like music is a job, but it ends up being like hyper rewarding in a fun way, right? Like there's this one event that I'm kind of like the MD on this event called Shiprocked. And it's like a festival on a cruise ship or whatever. One of the things that I'm in charge of is this stowaways thing where you get all these different guys from these different bands. Long story short, this year we got to do, one of the highlights was doing One by Metallica with Randy Blythe from Lamb of God singing it and Dave Ellison from Megadeth playing bass. So I'm looking across the stage at like this packed out cruise ship while we're playing one of those iconic Metallica songs. I'm like, dude, that's Randy Blythe. That's Dave Ellison. Like, whoa, this is cool.
Are you a big Metallica guy?
Not really, but I also think the Black Album is the greatest metal album of all time.
Really? What kept you from diving deeper? Just weren't into the early thrash stuff?
No. I do like it. I would tend to go, if I end up going raw with my metal, I tend to lean into like Pantera a little bit.
Yeah.
A little Southern swag in there. Never been a Slayer guy, right? I always like James's vocals, and I hate to just be like that guy, but I just think he's got a cool sounding voice. And I also think the idea of the Black Album was a gateway to understand that things can be heavy and metal and not be fast, which was,
and
you know,
the
sad but
songwriting
true and stuff. Yeah,
so
it's just
good.
like the songwriting, the hooks, the production, like Bob Rock.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thanks,
Even though
Bob
he was
Rock.
treated so poorly later on.
I mean, I'm not going to open that can of worms.
But
yeah, I mean, like really,
there's a documentary about it. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's fair talking game.
It's funny. The guy in that documentary, I've met in various circles. He's the doctor. He's a really great guy. Super nice guy.
Phil.
Yeah. Dr. Phil. He's really super awesome. The interesting thing, if you were to say, you know, what kept you diving deeper into is Van Halen. Van Halen is that is like, Eddie is on my Mount Rushmore of like life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like Eddie and Tony Rice and Bill Monroe. They're those are my dudes. George Benson probably way up there.
So I'm kind of I'm the opposite of you. I definitely was raised on like Waylon and Johnny Cash and George Strait and all that, you know, stuff growing up in Arkansas. But I definitely wasn't raised on bluegrass and Tony Rice.
Oh yeah, he's definitely Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, Kenny and that stuff. So that's come later. That's been in my 20s that I've been diving in that journey. So
what's your favorite Tony Rice record?
Well, I mean, I'm like on the Church Street Blues level of diving in. Like I've spent probably since COVID has been the beginning of my bluegrass journey.
You gotta have the J.D. Crowe New South 0044 record. Like I think that's the number. That's the one that's got like Old Home Place. Like if you ever hear any bluegrass jam or you go to Spigma or IBMA or any of that stuff, somebody's gonna kick off Old Home Place. It's like this industry standard tune, and it's that J.D. Crowe record. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's Skaggs on that record with him. So it's like before Skaggs was Skaggs and all that stuff. So definitely check that one out. Manzanita, Church Street Blues. Yeah, I could just
Well, I mean, this is the cool thing though, as far as like the exposure element is. It was Billy Strings during COVID. They got me to start going backwards
To where it
down
came
the
from?
journey.
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think
yeah.
like there's just so much content in the world, so many different avenues and musical stuff.
Can't
Like
get to it all.
yeah, I mean, we could spend our whole podcast and our whole careers learning, every Skynyrd song
Nook
and every
and cranny.
nook
Yeah.
and cranny. So unique that I'm sure you hear that all the time. That you came from playing the mandolin and banjo.
You talk about that lifetime thing, like, and that journey of coming from mandolin. Like you talk about that. I didn't play electric guitar till I was 17 years old, 16, 17. Like that's about when I started playing electric guitar. I had one and I just didn't care about it. I just wanted to grow up and be Sam Bush. Oh man, if I could just be Sam Bush, if I could just play a Newgrass Revival. So it's like, I spent my life really studying that like lore of the Kenny Bakers and the Buddy Spikers and like the deep roots of the entrenchment, especially with fiddle players, come from my granddad. My granddad got me started, right? And so fiddle players were really important.
What was he a player? And
Yeah,
so what
yeah.
was the exposure like? Hey, Andy, check this out. You might like it. Or it was like, sit down and learn a thing or two, young man.
It was less formal than that. My lineage is my granddad, and he had 3 daughters, and then one daughter had me and another daughter had my cousin, and we didn't have any siblings or anything. So when we were about 5 or 6, Gramps, we never dealt with like the miniature size instruments like Gramps. He was a construction worker. My family didn't have money growing up. And, he had a mandolin, an Alvarez mandolin that I still have to this day. And that's what I played because it fit. And so Brian played fiddle and I played mandolin, and that's how we spent the first 15 years of our musical life. Brian plays now for Travis Tritt, and I've had a really good career. So it's been kind of nice to see things be successful. With us, we were the same age, and like, we're close like brothers. And I actually was talking to him on the way here to this podcast,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was just the thing that we did. I mean, it was really interesting because I went to 2nd grade thinking like, I'd go in the room and be like, so what do you play? Like, I just thought everybody played. When you're a little kid, you just thought everybody did it, right? So I didn't realize till later that it was special. And it was very ironic that like when we were coming up, bluegrass wasn't cool. I remember going to Merlefest and there would only be about 8,000 people there. And now there's like 90,000 people or whatever it is. And
did Live Nation buy it?
I honestly
that would make sense.
Yeah, I honestly think it was like, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Oh yeah.
I think that coinciding with Alison Krauss's like ascendancy, that was just a special moment in time where like now bluegrass is something that's on every college campus everywhere. And like the jam band, Grateful Dead fan base getting a hold of things like Del McCurry, like really made it cross over.
Yeah.
And I think that's what made it just as popular as any other form of music. And now you've got guys like Billy that are like taking it, it's like would you have bought a Doc Watson record if it not for Billy kind of thing,
Actually, it's funny. It was the Doc because I had heard Deep River Blues.
Yeah.
And at like a coffee shop or
exactly.
something.
Right.
But it's so obscure to me that I was never exposed to it prior just because my dad didn't listen to it. My dad, I know
that's
every
the family thing.
White Snake, Steve Miller,
So that's how bluegrass was with my granddad.
Yeah.
I knew all the Johnny Cash, Merle stuff. But in general, my granddad listened to a lot more like Ray Price. So like Crazy Arms and stuff. Those iconic twin fiddle intros. Like that's what he listened to.
Heartaches by the Number.
For sure. Right. And like, so it was always about fiddle players, like, guys that played with Bill specifically, like Kenny Baker, Buddy Spiker, Bobby Hicks. Like it was about fiddle players in my family. And I think that's where a lot of my metal fusion chops come from. They're all just mutated mandolin and fiddle ideas. Like I've got a very signature way of navigating fast lines. And to me, it just sounds like a banjo and a fiddle. It just happens to be coming out of that Marshall or whatever.
Okay. So how do you feel about the exposure of any kind of advanced musicianship, like bluegrass musicianship or somebody who's really good at guitar at such a young age as opposed to later? I fundamentally believe, just from my experience in my life, and maybe it's just because I have hands that are like 6 feet long, but I'll never be able to play as fast as you because
I don't believe that.
I didn't start
I don't
till
believe
I was
that.
13
I don't believe any of that.
by myself. So that's what I want to know. I want to know what you think about. I've always felt that guys like you and people that just started when they were 5 or 6 or had someone that helped them introduce
I just don't believe that.
So let's hear it.
Okay, so my rationale is Bela Fleck, right? He didn't start playing until he was like 15 or 16 or whatever. He didn't grow up playing banjo. It just, he got there super quick. And here's maybe a personal one. I remember the idea of a dreadnought acoustic that is flanking me right here, a mandolin. You get maybe 2 pull-offs.
Yeah.
Maybe. And the note is dead. And if you're on a loud stage, you get 1, right? You have to pick everything. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the way I swore. Like I had the blinders on. I was like, the only way you can do this. So that's why I latched on to Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse, because he picked every note and it was easy for me to digest it. I remember seeing Steve Vai on like a G3 or one of these things, and he did one of these like, and I was like, well, that's impossible. They went back in and then I realized, no, with an electric guitar, you have all this additional compression and gain and things to where the nature of the strings being lighter. There's all these like physics that go into it. I believe that electric guitar is so different from this dreadnought. Like you can tune the strings whatever you want to. The physicality is different. And so learning the electric guitar coming from mandolin was so different that like the Van Halen stuff, the tapping, multi-finger tapping, sweeping, like any of these advanced metal techniques, like I assimilated those in my 20s. Like I didn't know who Paul Gilbert was when I was 21 years old.
So, but were you watching, what year was it when you were 21?
I graduated high school in 99.
So
like 98, 99.
So like early 2000s, right?
Early 2000s, I was getting hip to like these shred guys. Like that's when I heard Dream Theater for the first time.
Are you watching DVDs? Or are you just audibly unpacking it, listening to it, like and playing with the sounds?
Yes is the answer.
Yes.
Yeah, to both. Yeah. Like at that point, I mean, I didn't like, my granddad's generation, they had the record and that's what they had to listen to. They had to move it and like repeat it over and over. No slowing it down. Like my generation, I'm like 1 ahead of you, right? So like in age bracket. So like for my generation, we were right on the verge of internet and those kind of technologies, the task cams that would slow the CD down.
Yeah.
I remember having the Brent hot wired CD and pick it apart and stuff like that. Like that's why Brent is on my Mount Rushmore. Side note is like, I would have never played electric guitar if it wasn't for Brent Mason. I bought the Mark O'Connor New Nashville Cats album for Bela and Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush and Granny White Special, specifically that song. Dude, I heard Pick It Apart and I heard that telly and it was like when Stewie heard the banjo for the first time on Family Guy. What is that glorious sound?
What is that glorious sound?
And I was like, I have to go under that couch and find that electric guitar that I had. And I had a PV Bandit that was covered in like 8 feet of dust. And I plugged it in and I just started trying to figure out how to play. And that was another thing. Brent plays with a thumb pick and finger picks. And I tried that for like 3 weeks and I was like, this will never happen. So when I go back to like anyone can do it at any point in time, it's just a matter of where your mindset is. Now, here's what goes in your favor for your argument. When you're older, you have more distractions. You've got bills, taxes, girlfriends, wives, kids. You've got things to rob you of the time and the attention. When you're young, you just got time and attention, right? So like there is a little bit to be said with that. But if you're willing to dedicate the attention more so than the time, the attention to detail, I think anybody can learn to assimilate fast playing, whatever that's called, because not every fast player delivers the notes in the same way. That's another thing. Like the Brent thing is like this, like thumb, ring, thumb, middle, right? Like that's his fast way of playing. And for me, I knew that I could never get there with that speed, but I figured out a way to assimilate the Pick It Apart solo and play at a tempo. And that was like one of my like life journeys. Like if I can just play that with the record at tempo. The other one was playing the outro fiddle solo and it was from Mark O'Connor record. The other one was the outro fiddle solo to The Devil Came Back to Georgia. Not The Devil Went Down, the one that's got Marty Stewart and Johnny Cash. Have you heard that?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so there's a sequel to
It was an agreement.
There's a sequel to Devil Went Down to Georgia. And it's on the Heroes record with Mark O'Connor, and it's called The Devil Came Back to Georgia. Johnny Cash is the narrator. Mark O'Connor's playing the fiddle parts of Johnny, and Marty Stewart is the voice of Johnny. Travis Tritt is the voice of the devil. And it's like this homage kind of thing.
Travis Tritt is the voice of the devil.
So you need to hear that outro fiddle solo. Like I almost want to play it.
Playing.
I almost want to play it like on a phone right now.
We could do it. We could do it.
We're gonna do this. Let me find my phone.
Get that, dude. That pick it apart solo of Brent's. It's like the most relentless.
It's one of the hardest. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever tried to do in my life.
Have you seen him do it?
I've never seen him do it.
I didn't know if y'all played it at the woodshed.
No, he came up to me and was like, honestly, if Brent, if you're watching this, just turn it off because I'm going to say something that's really emotional to me. Like when he came up to me at the woodshed, he was just like, Andy, I saw that video of you playing Pick It Apart. And he goes, man, that articulation was just so clean. Let's just go ahead and retire that. And I was just like, God, if you'd have told the 16-year-old version of me, it like really got good to me. You know, it's like one of those things that really got good to me. So even if you have to cut this out of the podcast, this is The Devil Came Back to Georgia. And let's drop in and see if you can hear this outro solo. Yeah. And it's on this record right here. There's Marty. So the outro solo to this is one of the most ferocious things I've ever heard.
I love it. This is the first
Here we go. Here we go.
It's the same chord progression.
Just. This looks nasty. So like I learned that, and there's a video on YouTube of me playing that on the electric guitar. And that was like one of those like monumental, if I can just I sat there all day just trying to get the perfect take. It was just, and it was before the times of ease of direct recording. So it was one of those blue Tascam. So the lighting's terrible or whatever, but you can like hear my pick on the strings or whatever. That was like one of those like life-changing record guitar or fiddle solos. But again, like I was learning that as not a fiddle player, right? On an instrument that's not the fiddle. I didn't have anybody like walking me through how to work it on electric guitar. So I think the thing that you got to have when you're looking for facility, let's just use that word, facility. You're like, I've got big hands. I'll never be able to play as fast as you. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's one thing that's stopping you, and it's that idea right there.
So my part of the theory is I think that in your youth, especially your youngest, or like whenever, by the time you're making sentences to about the time you hit puberty, I would say.
Okay. So like from, let's say 5 years old to 12.
5 to 12. I would say that I think your brain's a way more absorbent sponge. And so so I'd present you with this. And I think maybe your reason of the theory is that you started so late on an electric guitar, you know that your time and attention and focus all came later in life. So it could for somebody else as well. Right?
Go.
Here I go. So I think if you start somebody at 5 and they see where they're at when they're 25, and then if you start somebody out at 25 and see at 45, and they have the same amount, hypothetically, the same amount of responsibilities, distractions, and focuses. And I think if they give the same amount of time and attention to detail over the course of 20 years, I think the one that starts at 5 is going to be way better.
So there's one caveat that we're not talking about that I think is really important. And it's the ability to delete the wrong answer from your physiology, from your anatomy. Okay. So when you teach a little kid how to ride a bike, you can show him, you can ride the bike in front of him. There's no mystery, right? But he has to feel it in his anatomy. It's like swimming. You can tell somebody how to swim, but until their body memorizes it. In youth, we'll just say those years of youth, you have a higher probability of deleting the wrong answer. When you're 25, you're stubborn and you're like, I'm going to brute force this technique. You're not really willing to understand that the one that hurts is the wrong answer. Also, you have a fearlessness with a kid that's 11 years old They don't care if it's the wrong note. They're going to like dig in there and go after it. So playing fast, this is a racing analogy, buckle up, literally. So like
helmets on.
Yeah. Playing fast is like driving fast. You can tell someone what's going to happen, but until you know what it's like to feel speed, it's not going to equate to your mind. That's the malfunction with the creeping up the metronome way of playing. Because my hand, when I'm playing something like Gold Rush, like a Bill Monroe tune, when I'm playing it slow, there's more motion, there's a looser feel, there's more pick swing. It's a completely different mechanic than when I play the same song, the same notes at 185. It's like I'm playing a different song, even though the notes are the same. Because and that's where creeping up the metronome doesn't get you there. What you have to do is kick the metronome. Like if your goal tempo is $170, play it at $150, and instead of worrying about, I hit a bad note, I've got to slow it down. No, drive it at the tempo that's desired and iron it out at that tempo. Like if you catch yourself flubbing the same thing, well then you're too tense or something's change the equation. Don't change the tempo too far, because you have to know your body has to memorize the bicycle, the swimming thing. Your body has to memorize speed. So that goes on the side of youth. But I also think, and I'll tell you why I think I can do it is I've had people that are 30 years old that I've brought their tempos up 50 BPM.
So you're saying don't practice the song if your goal is $170. Don't practice it at 95 BPM.
That's the dumbest thing you could ever do.
And a lot of people do that. And I've been a victim of that myself too, practicing.
And you're trying to creep it up in increments of 4.
Yeah, well, I'm more of a, okay, let me get it at 60. I got it perfect at 60. 190, here I come.
So it would be like the pick it apart solo. Let's use that for example. Like when you're learning every note that needs to be played, take that at whatever speed you need. Like I was having to reinvent my right hand technique because I literally don't have Brent's right hand technique. I don't play with a thumb pick. I don't play with the fingernails, right? So I was having to be like, okay, I got to cross pick these 3. The only way I would know that answer is like trying to play it fast. And I'd be like, okay, the cross picking will only work up to a certain tempo. I literally cannot move my pick that fast. So I need to have down, up, middle for the note I'm specifically thinking about a set of arpeggios that you guys will probably all recognize, but there's a set of arpeggios where it's like 2 notes, 1 note, 2 notes, 1 note per string. I was trying to pick it all and I was like, that's not going to work. So I have to go 2, 1, 2, middle. And then when I tried to play it fast, I could feel that the technique worked. It wasn't clean. The notes weren't right, but I was like, this will work. So that's what I mean by like jumping the metronome back and forth and playing with that fearlessness at a really high tempo. And that's what a kid will do. They don't care if they hit a bad note, right? So it's like the fact that we judge ourselves. We have more awareness in our 20s. That's the thing that's going against you. It's not like in your 20s, you're fighting weight as far as your physiological and anatomical build.
I don't know, dude. I can't gain weight, bro.
You're there as far as your facility. You really are, right? So it's a matter of like now it's like harnessing that. And I said I've had guys that were like, I'll never be able to play at this speed, or I'll never be able to cross pick. And like in 6 months they're doing it. I'm like, yeah, because now you've opened your mind up to like not trying to brute force the thing that you think it is. You have to delete it, right? From you only have so much hard drive space for your anatomy. So when the one is like hurting, you're like, I can't use this technique. I cannot play from this part, or people that do the Tony Rice Ingve thing where they play from the fingers, like whichever one it is that's not working, you just got to be okay with being like, that's not the one that works. Now try the tempo you want and iron it out at speed. I'm off my soapbox. I just believe that more people can do it than the people that they tell themselves they can't do it.
And it's kind of, the whole thing is still kind of a generalization because there is the actual physical differences. Like that's the part that we won't really know about is your muscles might just be tighter.
I would love to have a bigger hand size. There's voicings that like I can do when I'm sitting down and the guitar is like this that I can't play standing up. And I just know that like, and if I had Guthrie Govan size hands, or you got these really long hands like Steve Vai, it's like they're able to wear the guitar low and have this longer reach. There is that, But there's, for every rule that we could say, there's like 15 guitar players that like break the rule that don't have, like Danny Gatton or Brent or whatever. Like Brent doesn't have big hands. And that guy like wrote the Pick It Apart solo and played it live on national television. It's like,
when I asked him, when I said, who's the guy that if you're in a room full of dudes that are in the same ballpark as you, you know, who's the guy that goes toe to toe with you? And he said, you are, as far as speed and technique. So I'd say that
means a lot, dude. I have a letter on my studio wall that I wrote Brent when I was 16, and he wrote me back, and I've kept it framed my whole life.
Really?
Yeah. And it hangs on my wall. I sent him a picture of it one day. I was like, hey man, he said something. And I was just like, hey man, just so you know, just so the air is clear, like you are the reason that I play the electric guitar. Like I would have never got to Eddie Van Halen or Steve Morse or any of the guys that I'm really into, right? Guthrie Govan. I would have never cared about electric guitar. I would have still been a mandolin player.
Was it hearing his skill set in the electric guitar format, or was it like actually the riffs?
It was like, just how is the sound.
The sound, because
it's just the sound. It's undeniable. It's like hearing Jeff Beck play A Day in a Life. Like it's so much more than the pieces of the puzzle, right? Like to me, another big one for me is Jimmy Page, and he's not clean. But like when he kicks off Heartbreaker or Black Dog, it's unmistakable. When it's the thing that like 30 guitar players in the room have learned the solo and they all play it, and then the guy that does it, and you're just like, God, that's it. Like that's the sound. Another great one with like Woodshed is I get to hear all these guys play through not their rigs, a microcube in the cabin, or like, you know, so-and-so's rig. Hey man, so-and-so's trying out so-and-so's rig. And it's just, they sound like themselves.
Yeah.
And it's so magic. It's so magic, right? And it's like the Van Halen thing. I call it that, right? Because like Eddie used different rigs his whole life. He like, it was the Marshall, then it was the PVs, then it's the EVH brand stuff. And it was just like the moment he does it, it just has a sound. So for me, it was like, I was so in love with like the way that Brent delivered it. It hit me like the Bela thing. Like Bela's got a sound outside of the ridiculous chops. There's just a sound of the banjo that he delivers that like is so good to me. Adam Steffi has a sound on mandolin that's just, there's a random guy that not a lot of mandolin players are aware of, a guy named Emery Lester. And he was the guy, I think from like West Virginia or something. And I remember hearing his thing. And it was like that Chris Thiele thing, like before Nickel Creek was even a thing. Like he was doing, like Emery was a big influence. So to me, it's like, I went to UT, I studied at jazz school or whatever, but like it's easy to teach harmony because it's undeniable if like that note is a B flat or whatever. It's easy to teach rhythm because it's undeniable if something's a 16th or an 8th note or whatever. It's really hard to teach the last one, and the last one's the most important, which is sound, tone, timbre, whatever you want to call that.
I like character.
Whatever that tone is, right? Because you can play a Merle Haggard song through a Marshall and it doesn't sound right. It's not the right sound. And everything else can be right. And you'd be like, I don't like that. It's not right. But when you hear it played with the correct amplifier or whatever, you know, the correct hands.
And Roy Nichols does it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's crazy. Even, I think when you hear Brent play on, As Many Monsters are on Paisley's Cluster Pluck.
Yeah.
And then you can just still tell every moment that he's playing, because I said it just, his fingers are like cannons.
They just got just like something there. Yeah, it's like the round thing. And I think a lot of that, you know, was really interesting. Like I played Brent's guitar through his board and his amp and everything. One of the things that I noticed that's so fundamental to his tone is the fact that most of the time when he's burning, he's not really anchored to the guitar in any way on, like, there's not a lot of anchoring points. It's like watching him anchor. And the other thing is like the strings are ringing out constantly. There's not a lot of muting. That was like a big wake up call for me when I got to really hang out and like see him play in person. That was like, oh crap, that's like a big fundamental thing. And being in some of the environments that I've been in, I've been blessed to be around some really great players like Scott Henderson. Like I was able to just stand from me to that telly and like jam with Scott. And I was like, oh, it was like this aha moment. Like when you see guys play in person, and especially when you can hear what they're playing. I don't mean see them play in person at a venue for a show. I mean, like you can like see it like from me to that thing, right? You start picking up on, oh, he's got this much of his forearm off the body, right? Like that's like what chokes out a lot of bluegrass guitar players versus like someone like Brian Sutton. He's not choking. It's like there's like this warmth to the sound, right? I don't know. We're getting way put on the nerdy glasses. We're getting way muso-fuso.
There's going to be guys with notebooks just like.
It's way muso-fuso. But like this is some of the stuff that I was talking about when you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and attention to detail. And if you are in your 20s, like you obsess over these things like 20s to 40s versus 5 to 14. When you're 5 to 14, it's like this stuff, you don't have a lot going on in your life. That's the difference.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Some people do. Some people, were you forfeiting a social life
absolutely
in your youth?
Absolutely.
So would you say in your youth you were like an introvert, like cupboard under the stairs, glued to the mandolin?
Not an introvert, but I spent so much time with my granddad playing music, going to bluegrass festivals. Like I spent a lot of time with my cousin and him just on the front porch. So I wasn't going to baseball practice. I wasn't doing all of these things. I was just hanging out and learning fiddle tunes.
We just got a refill on some bourbon, and you were showing me a Mark O'Connor solo that I had to see. I love how excited you still get about it. I mean, you've known that stuff, so long.
I mean, when music's good, the only thing about when you get better at music, it makes all the average stuff seem way worse.
Really?
So when you get better at music, if something's phoned in, like that really it makes me think it's like, I would rather see someone who's terrible, who has given it all they got. And by that, I mean, like, here's a great example of this. Like, let's use Ryan Adams, who's a fantastic songwriter and a fantastic artist. And I think his guitar playing is super a long ways away from like the guys we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's no danger of someone mistaking his solo for an Eric Johnson or Brent Mason solo, right? Like, it's like he's super far. But when he does stuff, he's given it absolutely every bit that he's gotten. And he's one that I don't think is phoning it in, right? Versus like, there's been plenty of festivals that I've played where it's like the artist or the band for the artist is phoning it in. And even though it's sonically more acceptable, I feel robbed because I can just tell that it's being phoned in, right? So like when I hear that Mark O'Connor solo that I was playing for you, he's absolutely giving it he is going for blood. Like Russell Crowe, Are you not entertained?
Yeah, like, gladiator level.
Yes. And that's what gets me so fired up. And I think that's what's really inspiring. You were asking when we were setting up, in a roundabout way, what's really attractive about doing like a pop country gig like Gary or Flats or whatever. And it was like, because our band is just full of just velociraptors. And like, I can just hear a different chord voicing that like Mike does. Mike is so inspirational to me. Shout out to Mike Hicks. I just hear something and I'm just like, God, I wish I'd have thought of that. Oh man, so brilliant, And like Jim Riley's the same way. Like he just does something that's really creative and it just inspires you. And I don't feel like those guys phone it in. Like they're playing for keeps, like anytime they're at the table. And that's what really fires me up. And I think you don't have to be advanced to play for keeps. Like when we talk about the camp and those guys are like at night and they're jamming with Mark or Brent or something and they're playing like their level of Mustang Sally or Crossroads and they're giving it everything they got. It's like, dude, that's the most inspiring thing on the planet. It's not the final product. It's like what's being poured into it.
Do you see these guys shed, like, is there any kind of nervousness or trepidation at the beginning of the weekend? And then like 2 days
I think everybody there's got it. Yeah. We're all standing. I mean, like, I'll tell you, one of the funny ones is like, it's me, Andy Timmons, who is, I always say this, there's no such thing as the perfect guitar tone, and Andy Timmons has it. That's how I say that, right?
From one Andy to another.
Yeah. So Timmons, Letary, and we're all there, and Bonamassa was our first year. He was like our featured guy or whatever. And he's like such an aw shucks, not me. I can't play like you guys. Dude, he hit the first 3 notes and all 4 of us were just like, just the greatest thing we'd ever heard. It's just like, yeah, don't forget he can throw down, right? And it's just like when you look across the row of Greg Koch, and I mean, it's like the best guitar players in the world. Like there's 7 of them, like 7 of the literal best guitar players in the world. And, you know, a lucky 92 people are there or whatever to like witness it. We got a live band. Like when you talk about the nervous butterflies, you don't have to be sitting out there. Like we're all like, man, what are we supposed to play? Like, and it just keeps happening, right? Because you have these great players from different genres. I think that's what's really important about it. And I think butterflies are good. I think that's a good thing as long as you don't let it control you.
Would you say that in response to you talking about somebody giving it their all, would you say that about somebody like Kurt Cobain, who could barely play guitar?
Absolutely.
Gave every...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question, right? It's not and I think that's some of the gatekeeping that can happen in our industry that I don't like. I don't like the gatekeeping where it's like, oh man, well he can't play an augmented sweep at, 150. It's like, man, you ain't got to be Frank Gabali to make great music that connects with people.
When Gary Rossington passed away and you did that cover of Tuesday's Gone, which is just slow and steady and simple, and really just kind of, it felt like a breathing of life into music, into that moment that you were experiencing and all these people in the guitar community were experiencing. And I thought, I hate that there's so much of the guitar community and people posting that's just like, let me record this 180 times, get that one time where I get it right.
And then edit that one time for it to be perfect and then mime it.
Yeah.
It's like, mime it. It just keeps unfolding, right? But then the worst is the gatekeeping, like where it's like, if you aren't good, then you don't get to sit at our table, or like, it's like that. I don't like that at all. And that happens in jazz circles. That happens in bluegrass circles. I'm looking at you traditional guys. I don't like that. Stop doing it. Everyone should be welcome to come and sit at the table. Like, we live in a beautiful era of technology where it can be used to be like growing up on Van Halen and Rat and this stuff. And then you hear a Billy Strings and it makes you want to be a Tony Rice guy and listen to his stuff. And maybe you've only been playing bluegrass for a year. You should be able to go to a jam and be welcomed into that jam and not be ostracized because you don't know every Bill Monroe song. Like, it's like I like and I think that's like maybe the mission statement for like what we do at Woodshed. And I think that's really important for the kind of players I bring in. I had Tosin Abasi last year. He's at the forefront of prog metal. He plays an 8-string guitar. And I want all those guys that see that, and guys that know Guthrie Trapp and know Brent Mason, to be like, hey man, there's this other side of the game that's really exciting. And vice versa. We had kids coming only for Tosin who had no idea who Brent Mason was, or Mark Lettieri, or Greg Koch, right? All that stuff's really exciting to me about the guitar as a community. When you talk about the online thing, it's like, yeah, that Tuesday's Gone thing, I just turned it on. I was like, hey man, this is bumming me out. Mike Rhodes is a big hero of mine. And you're telling me that he died within 24, 38 hours or whatever of Gary Rossington. And like, dang man, that's the last, in my opinion, take it for what it's worth, but that's the last Skinner. I mean, Artemis Powell's still alive, but like even Artemis wasn't on the first record, right? Like that's the last of the original guard.
Yeah.
That passed on. And it just hit me hard, man. And it was like, I just want to post a thank you. And sometimes it's like the only way I know how to like say thank you is like just play a cover of their stuff and it not be as good as the original, but it's my cover. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that you, I don't know if you remember this or if you pieced this together, but I'd emailed you one time asking for, to meet up for an in-person lesson because I couldn't do the digital
Did
format.
I respond?
Yeah, you did. Like 6 months later, if with all due respect about bringing it up, I think you were going through a rough time last year.
Yeah.
I didn't want to
and two, it's like,
that's my greatest fear is what you went through last year. So like
man. Like he's talking, for those that don't know, he's talking about like the passing of my dad. I lived my whole life, never had a tattoo. I got this from my pops, and it was a rough time, but honestly, a lot of me not responding promptly. And I have to say this just globally, social media changes its formats all the time. And email, unfortunately, is a subsidiary of technology. And I always feel so bad when a guy says, "Hey man, I didn't hear back from you," or like, it's like, I feel like sometimes I get waterlogged. I mean, it's just me. I don't have like a for real, like heavy duty label behind me or anything. So like, I try to handle everything personally. And when people say, "Oh man, is this really Andy?" It's like, yeah, man, I'm really trying, Last year was a tough year, man. It was really tough. But, in general with in-person lessons, I always feel bad because like my schedule changes. Like I had my schedule for this week and it's already changed 3 times since I've been in town doing rehearsals.
Yeah.
So my apologies for that. But like, also it's like the thing that I want to encourage people about digital music and digital platforms and, where we're at with Zoom. It's like, man, you can be in the middle of nowhere. If you got a good Wi-Fi signal, you can do a killer, like in-person kind of hang, right? Like that's been a big thing for me with the community building and trying to pull different aspects of positive people together is like an online format, right? Because if there's 5 negative Nancys, I hope that there's 10 positive people.
Yeah.
Like,
well, for me, I just kind of sent it on a whim and I didn't even really think anything about hearing back. It wasn't, but you did, I think it was 4 to 6 months later. I did see around that time was when that was happening in your life.
Yeah.
And so, and I was transitioning to move here from Indianapolis to Nashville.
Indy, okay.
And I'm from Arkansas, but I lived in Indy for like
Gotcha.
4 years. I want to maintain that Arkansas pride. But you responded to me. I had messaged you and I said, "Hey, I'm not sure what your rates are, but I'm happy to pay them. I'd love to get together in person." And you had said, "Why have you not had success over digital platforms and formats?" You said, "My students have had a lot of success." And so I'd love to answer that email. I actually didn't respond to you, my man. I'll respond to you, and I'm sure it kept you up at night. But for me, it was not so much a thing where it's like, I want to be in the room with Andy Wood. Like
right.
that part's cool. But to actually like sit there and be a person about it and look at your fingers, and it's just a different thing than like craning your neck over a computer screen.
It's 100% different, right? Yeah. The reason I think that maybe this is a selfish thing that you're making me aware of, and I didn't realize I was being selfish. I spent so much time trying to get perfect audio for my camera and my viewers in my Zoom classes to where it's like they feel like they're right there and I can zoom it in and so it's like my instant response when someone doesn't have a successful online thing. I'm like, oh, what can I improve on? What can I make a better experience for? The biggest reason is like, I want to travel, I want to tour, I want to be on the road, but I also want to cultivate this community, and you can't be in 2 places at the same time. So I'm always trying to perfect the way that I can deliver a personal experience and not be in person.
I think it's just a personality type thing, because I think you've probably got tons of students and followers that adhere to whether it's watching the Woodshed on YouTube or your Patreon stuff, that would way rather watch you on their screen from the comfort of their own room. It's
that's
like,
a big one that I maybe didn't put stock in either. Is like, maybe that's a thing that people are like, maybe they would be too, I know I would be intimidated if somebody was like, "Hey man, you can have a lesson. Eddie Van Halen's coming back from the dead tomorrow and you can have a lesson with him." I would be like, "I can't play the guitar. Sorry." Let's turn this off. Oh no.
I was like, is there somebody else here? But,
no. No, I'm a nerd, and my cell phone is actually the voice of Jarvis, which is Iron Man's AI.
Oh yeah.
So it announces my,
dude, I was watching the other day. I've for some reason, I struggle with Robert Downey Jr.'s delivery of his final line as Iron Man in Endgame.
What is it about it?
It's because, Thanos says, "I am inevitable."
Yeah. Okay.
And RDJ is like, "And I am Iron Man."
It's like catching the breath. Like
yeah.
that
And
thing.
so that's what my buddy argues with me. He's like, "Dude, Tony's gassed. He's been fighting this guy for
that
2
and
hours.
he just had the power.
Yeah,
so he
come
can
over.
barely probably get the words out. Right. If you notice, those are like the last words he can ever get.
But I do know, I read an article that was a reshoot.
It was a reshoot, and he improv that. He shot that from the hip.
So everybody that ever hits you up to talk, it's a guitarathon, and the Woodshed is a guitarathon. Let's go down Nerd Alley for a little bit.
Okay.
I'll start out asking you, You said you got that tattoo when your father passed away.
Yeah.
What is the connection with Tolkien's world?
Okay, so it's not
you and your father.
Okay, so it's interesting. There was a church in North Carolina that I grew up in, and in that church there's a stained glass window that my great grandfather paid for when my great grandmother died. Now, obviously, I did not know them, but it was always a cool looking window to me. I remember being in church and it like had a castle sitting over some waves and stuff, but it's stained glass from a certain period, so it's not really detailed. I would always tell my dad, I'm going to get a tattoo one day. And he's like, yeah, I hear you. Like that was our big joke. Cause I would just talk about like, yeah, I'm going to go to the moon, like we had this great relationship like that. And he's like, all right. So I always said, anytime I'd do something big in the music industry, I was going to get a tattoo and I was going to get that window and I was going to have a full sleeve, and, he said, I would play for, Scott Stapp on that big tour that he did. And he was like, are you getting it now? I'm like, no, like my band would open for Seven Dust on a tour back in the day with Down From Up. You going to get it now? No, the signature model happens. That was really crazy, right? You going to get it? No, I don't know. It's got to be bigger. Play the ACMs, right? Like I kept doing these crazy things, playing the CMA Fest, and things started getting crazier and crazier. You're going to get it. You're going to get it. And then when he passed, I was like, now I get it. Yeah. So that was the connotation. So I got the window, but I didn't want the window to have that castle because it was like kind of small. And like, it was just like some things in real life don't translate to good art. So I wanted it just subtly twisted a little bit. So I took different pieces of my favorite castles in pop culture, and that's what I made the castle. So the theme is still the same. It's still this fortress over the water, but the top white spires is Link's castle from Hyrule.
Yeah.
And then the walls are from Dragonstone from Game of Thrones. And then the water wheel is Rivendell. And then, so it was just like all my favorite castles
really
crammed into one. Yeah. So that was like the homage. And when I was going to place it, I was like, man, I'm a guitar player. I don't want my one tattoo being where nobody could ever see it. I want to put it right where the world. So I was like, this is for Pops. And then I'm going to get a fiddle bow on this wrist for my granddad. My mom was super conservative. Mom, I love you, but you were too conservative. I'm telling you right now. She was so conservative. We weren't allowed to watch TV, MTV. We could have TV, couldn't have MTV, right? So I never got to really indulge in the Motley Crue and the Guns N' Roses and stuff until, moved out or whatever when I was 16 or whatever. But like, it's not the music my dad listened to. My dad listened to a lot of Beach Boys and stuff. So he was the side of the family that didn't play. My mom's side was the bluegrass side.
Well, I ask all this to say, you're a big Star Wars guy, right? And I imagine you had plenty of exposure to pop culture in the 80s and stuff. So I just thought it was interesting that you veered away from the music. So
it was literally Brent's solo that made me want to play electric guitar. Like that's, and then I was like, okay, what's all this other stuff? Yeah. I just didn't care. Maybe it was an apathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How big of a Star Wars guy are you? Like
super big.
I went to the convention,
like the Star Wars con. That's like the official one.
I went to Celebration 5, which would have been in 2010 because it was the 30th anniversary of Empire.
This is how big of a Star Wars fan I am. I yell at Twitter. I yell at Kathleen Kennedy virtually.
Yeah.
And I do all the things. I also have a full-sized Darth Vader armor. I have lots of sabers.
Okay, who's your favorite hilt?
Aesthetically?
Yeah, just visually, what it looks like.
Qui-Gon.
Oh, yeah?
Because it looks like a samurai sword.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's got the best hilt. I love that Mace's was purple and had hints of gold. I think the Emperor's is pretty sweet. It looks pimped. That's Dooku.
Dooku's has got the curved one, but
yeah, Palpatine's is just pimped out. A lot of gold, a lot of eccentric. And then the old school ones just look really mechanical, which is cool. But I think Qui-Gon's aesthetically is my favorite because it looks like a Ronin
Yeah.
Bushido kind of thing.
So you're the generation before me. So what's your relationship with the prequels?
10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. They've grown on me like a fine wine.
Oh, dude.
I think Revenge of the Sith is
I'm so
an
happy to hear you say
absolute.
this.
I'll say this. It might go Empire Strikes Back, Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One.
Rogue One is fantastic.
And I'll say this. The last episode of Mandalorian season 2 might be the 4th.
Really?
That is one of the greatest things that's ever happened in Star Wars in the past 20 years.
I'm so glad to hear that
We're
you're a fan
spoiler free, right?
of
Like
the
we can
prequels.
talk about like
Star Wars is, I would say by
Mandalorian.
nature, I'd say after a week later,
You're
it's
good.
all safe.
Okay, so
territory.
like Luke returning, Obi-Wan, I was standing in my living, not Obi-Wan, Luke returning and R2-D2. I was standing in my living room on the verge of tears. I was so happy. Like I was losing my mind. Because I was for sure that the X-Wing coming in was going to be Ahsoka in the X-Wing.
Right.
And then when I saw the black hand of the glove, I was like, there's no way. And then the green lightsaber, I was like, oh my God.
When
they're
then they
doing
had him in
it.
an episode of like the Boba Fett show.
But by then it was awesome and he was back. But like previous to that, I'm also the guy that's going to be an old man yelling at a cloud and say the sequels had all this potential. I was watching Force Awakens and I was like, yo, we've got a new big bad. Everything's all, I mean, then Last Jedi just took a dump all over it. That's where
People at the bars all the time, like customers, will tell me I look like Kylo Ren.
Kylo's the best part about the sequels, truthfully.
He's so very monotone in his delivery of everything he says.
Yeah, it's pretty good, Kylo. Pretty good, Kylo.
I think the end all be all of the prequels and why they work and why there's so much stronghold of emotional heart in those films is Ewan McGregor holding it down as Obi-Wan. Dude.
I'm going to be a dark horse. I'm going to say it's Hayden Christensen.
Really?
And here's why. Anakin was supposed to be a whiny, bratty little kid, and everybody hated him for that in not Phantom Menace, Clone Wars, Attack of the Clones. And I think his delivery of that was better than what they don't want to imagine Anakin anything other than just a full-on monster, like a beast. So I love Hayden and Revenge of the Sith Hayden. I will say this, Ewan is Obi-Wan, no question.
Yeah.
But man, did you watch the Obi-Wan series where they finally come back around and he sees each other as Vader with the...
It was devastating. I thought there's no way they were going to reach the emotional heights, but
yeah.
Revenge of the Sith is one of those movies that every time you watch it, you're like, it shocks you what's happening.
It hurts.
I love the prequels. I'm so glad that you
Love
love
them.
And you're so if you were in a conservative household and weren't allowed to listen to AC/DC,
I was not allowed to listen to AC/DC.
When did the video game console enter your hand?
It's weird. My
Super Nintendo guy, SNES guy.
Yeah. I mean, I have an interesting age group, that early 80s age group. Like I had a Nintendo in the house and it was like Zelda and Mario and stuff. Video games with me and my cousin was really big, and we were the fighting game generation.
Like Street Fighter
2, Mortal Kombat, all that stuff, right? Like, so we were way into that. And the video game console thing was interesting because that was about the time, if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of going on with politics and parental advisories. That's when the rating codes and all that stuff. People were buying games just because it said TNMA or whatever, like whatever, like, right. So it was, I remember Mortal Kombat being this big deal or whatever, but with Brian and I, like we definitely played all those like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, like anytime a new fighting game came out, it was a big deal. And then of course there were like classic hits. There were like F-Zero, definitely SNES, right? Like that was a big one. Sonic, Super Mario World.
Okay. My question for you is Super Mario 64. Are you in or out of it? Like, because if you're
saying greatest Mario of all time?
I'm saying like the game of all games, not counting this century, but the game changer for the 3D element and the world exploration and the fact that it's essentially a free roam.
I will give you a little bit of that, but I think it was Ocarina of Time. To me, Ocarina of Time to this day is the greatest single player video game of all time.
It's a little more mature for sure.
The idea of the scope is so big that in 2023, you could release it right now and it would still be considered a large game. Like that's the word I want to use, is like scope. I remember turning it on and being like, I'm going to jump back and forth between Child Link and Future Link, and like all of this idea of dichotomy with a video game and what you do in one time period will affect something that happens in another. That enough is to be amazing. But then to realize the scope of the 3D free roam world, it was like all this stuff working together. It just like, it wrecked me. I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I'm also a Zelda fanboy.
Yeah.
I'll go Link over Mario.
How about this? Best Star Wars game.
For me personally, this is not what I think, but the one that I put the most time into was the one with Star Killer.
Oh, Force Unleashed. Yeah.
I dumped hours.
I dumped hours.
I just dumped hours into that thing. Force Unleashed was, and I like the idea that you're like wavering, but I always like the idea of like the gray Jedi, right? Like I love the purple lightsaber, right? Yeah, I like all that lore. I do have high hopes for the new Star Wars that comes out next week.
I will say
Survivor?
I'm pretty behind. Oh wait, that's the sequel to Fallen Order. That's the last one I did.
Order? Oh,
well,
masterpiece,
dude. All I know is I played that game and I like the Roman, but the fact that when you die you have to respond to the front of the map is so frustrating. But there's this one, I can't remember his name, Wolverine looking Sith Lord.
Yeah.
And I must have played that 900 times to beat that guy, and I was on easy.
I love that. I'm from the era of a Halo 2 is probably the most important game of my lifetime. And when Halo 3 happened and you had to go get all the skulls to get the Hayabusa armor, like I love the ridiculously difficult video game. I'm in a video game clan called Big Shrimpin'. Shout out to my shrimp.
Yeah.
Shrimpin' Ain't Easy is our logo, obviously. And we love to get in there and try to do like Destiny 2 is our drug of choice, and we get in there with the multiplayer raids and do it. So like difficulty to me is an attraction. I think that's something too about music. Like we were talking about technique and all that thing. I'm an engineering brain and I like to solve the puzzle. So for me, the thing that kept me entrenched with learning solos that weren't on the instrument, like I love to learn fiddle solos or banjo solos or whatever that weren't on guitar. I think all of that is the same thing on why I was a Zelda guy, not a Mario guy, why I like a high difficulty.
Do you think that so many of the legends and of the instruments that you play and of people that we probably mutually admire of the past, had they exposure to games of the modern age, that they would have participated in?
Ooh, like, are you asking like what would Bill Monroe play if he was a kid today? Is that where you're going with this thing? Because I like that.
I think that's a better way to twist it, because I think it's stupid. It's like, obviously if Bill Monroe was born in 2022, he'd probably have TikTok, you know?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Right. He would like have TikTok, but like what video game would he play?
Yeah. Let's do that. What video game would Bill Monroe play if he had a PS5?
So let's take some Bill Monroe facts.
Yeah.
Things that we got to apply to today. He would be the youngest. He would come from a family of poverty, and he would get what was ever left over. That's why he played the mandolin. Let's keep all that intact.
So do you think he's playing PS2 maybe? Right? In 2022?
I would say, let's say that he
hand-me-down PS2.
He gets a hand-me-down console, and I think the nature of Bill Monroe, obviously he loved genres and cultures that were not his own because he pulled from blues and Delta and stuff, right? Obviously mixing it with his pseudo-Appalachian heritage. I think you would have to say that Bill Monroe would probably play a hand-me-down version of either Madden or NBA 2K.
What year?
It's 2023. He would probably be playing like a 2019, 2018.
Okay. So relatively recent.
I would imagine that his siblings weren't like a billion years older than him. Yeah. You know what I mean? Let's keep it.
All right. Who for me? Don't go too deep.
What game would you play?
No. You give a dead legend to me.
Dead legend, and you've got to, okay, you're saying don't go deep cut. Let's say this. What video game would Elvis Presley or John Lennon. You can dealer's choice.
Okay. You went as mainstream as possible.
I went super mainstream. I went mega mainstream. And they're both dead. And they're both legends.
Yeah, okay. 2020. I'm going to go with Elvis because
what's Elvis going to play?
I'm more of a fan of Elvis.
What video games are you going to play?
That's my guy right there.
Paul's the guy.
He's the guy.
He's my favorite Beatle too.
So let's see here. Elvis Presley. And,
what video games he playing?
He grew up poor too. So I think without a doubt he's getting his hands on a hand-me-down Xbox 360 from a cousin. And he's playing GTA San Andreas.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go like towards like a Bayonetta or Perfect Dark or something like that with a female lead.
I was almost thinking of doing James Bond GoldenEye.
That's too far away.
Too far back.
That's
right?
too far back.
Maybe Nightfire.
That's like your nepotism showing for GoldenEye.
I really think the people that make it this far that like have that survived all the guitar stuff, mandolin stuff, and then made it to this video
well, that's where
game,
you edit this and put this at the front.
This is the most important part.
You put that at the front.
They're gonna be like, why are these guys grinning and giggling, and why are their whiskey glasses emptier at the beginning of the podcast than they are
technicalities
at the beginning? But no, I sure appreciate your time, and I don't want to take too much of it. I know that we could.
Let's do a rapid fire thing. Give me 4 rapid fire questions. I'm not allowed to go in depth.
Okay. You're like,
go.
What did you think of Chris Stapleton's national anthem?
It's the greatest of all time. Next question.
AC/DC or Zeppelin?
Zeppelin.
We're going to leave it at
You
that.
can rapid fire more than 4 because this is really good.
Yeah, okay. What did you think of the Steve Vai, Ralph Macchio movie?
It was one of the single most influential things of my guitar playing.
I really thought it might have been just because of the visual element.
Outside of that, Ry Cooder is one of my favorite slide players of all time, and Steve Vai at that point in his life was playing with an intensity that most players will never reach.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. You kind of brand your original music as pseudo rock fusion or something.
And
like
more
that?
of like a country fusion, so like a confusion. Thank you for that setup.
That's my
fusion, like confused person.
Confusion, like country fusion, right?
No, it's weird because I think someone who doesn't know me but knows guitar, they would be like, oh, he sounds like the Dixie Dregs. There's Southern influence in advanced technical crap.
I think Forgotten Secrets is like Seminole Wind had a baby with Cliffs of Dover.
It's like a fiddle tune for Marshall amplifiers.
Because it's like that 1374.
It's got an interest. It's definitely fiddle tune. The ironic thing about Forgotten Secrets is it was written on mandolin. Most of my stuff is actually not written on electric guitar. Yeah. And like I kept playing on mandolin.
Intro.
No, that was actually written. That's a telly idea that I had for another song. There was like a clean telly chicken picking song.
Yeah.
And when I got in there, I was like, I kept nudging them closer together.
Was there anything recorded that showed such riff-tastic athleticism as the last 5 minutes of Freebird prior to that?
I love the question.
Yeah.
I love where it's at. I will counter that with a 23, 24-year-old immigrant kid with a homemade guitar in 1978 with the 1 minute and 29 seconds of Eruption. A kid that should have had nothing, that had the entire world going against him, reinvented the landscape of the industry.
Right.
And outside of the technical facility, the fact that he put a Variac, which is a light dimmer, on an amplifier to get more distortion, then now you've got companies like Mesa Boogie existing purely on the idea of more gain. Yeah, like I do love the Freebird thing, but I will die on the hill of Eddie Van Halen's Eruption.
Mm-hmm. Well, the creativity and unpredictability. I know a lot of more advanced guitar players that don't get too fixated on the Skynyrd stuff because it's pretty repetitive. But I think I
love that. It's what stays with you. Like if you've only heard it one time, you can still know that it goes. Like I can sing that and not even think about it. It's so like ingrained, right? So I think Freebird's way up there for sure with all the points you made, for sure.
All right,
I had to counter with my favorite.
I just want to know, what is the scale and the scope that music for film and cinema between John Williams, Hans Zimmer, Danny Elfman, all these people, what What effect has that had on you?
Yeah, it's helped me. I want to word this correctly. It's helped me focus on something that is memorable and not difficult. Too often as a guitar player, I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. We're trying to play to the guitar players in the room versus trying to come up with something memorable. If I say Indiana Jones, you know how the melody goes without thinking. If I say Star Wars, you know how it goes. With Simpsons, right? You know how it goes, right? Cinema has a way, like those kind of composers, they have a way of me kind of unplugging from the mechanics of my instrument and just thinking about a really great melody. And like, if something's fantastic, you can plunk it out on a toy xylophone and you'll recognize the melody from Gladiator or whatever, right? Versus like something hyper technical may only be impressive on the guitar because it's hard to physically do on the guitar. It may not transcend, right? Like banjo lines on guitar sound insane. They sound like, oh my God, this guy is a mutant. But banjo lines on banjo, the instrument is designed mechanically to play fast arpeggios. So it doesn't sound insane. It sounds like normal banjo, right? That all of that stuff is like the coalition. All right, next rapid fire. That's my answer.
All right, I think it's time for our last one.
Okay, last one.
Gun to your head, would you say the number one most influential, you think the most creative and expressive person that's ever picked up the instrument and given more to it?
Has to be a guitar player. Has to be a guitar player. Has to be a guitar player.
Yes, they gave more to it after them than anyone else gave after their own existence than before them. Do you think it's Eddie Van Halen?
No question. There's absolutely zero argument. I'll give you 3 reasons.
He stole you from bluegrass.
The reasons are the awareness of a great riff, the rhythm playing, the awareness of a great riff. They kind of go together. You can, and this is my challenge to any viewer or listener, mute out any solo from any Van Halen song. The song is still incredible. Okay. Eddie Van Halen also had a great awareness from harmony, come from being a piano player. Okay. Outside of that, you have to throw in technical proficiency just for fun. Like nobody did all the skiddly dives, whatever, right? That's in there, whatever. The next thing would be no one has had an influence on the mechanics of recording guitar like Eddie Van Halen since Les Paul. Okay, Les Paul was your 4-track recording. Eddie Van Halen, there's no Life is a Highway, like high gain pushed amplifier sound. There's no like, I'm looking over here, I see this Les Paul, like that pickup doesn't belong in a Stratocaster. It was there because of Eddie Van Halen. So from the pure, there's no Mike Soldano, there's no Dave Friedman, there's no John Sir. Like these companies and these geniuses of amp building, guitar manufacturing. I truly believe there's no Tom Anderson, right? There's no Randall Smith from Mesa Boogie. Like these guys, when I say these names, these guys are giants in the industry that have multi-million-dollar companies that are built upon the foundations of they make great gear. I think that does not exist without Eddie Van Halen.
And I think they'd probably agree with you.
For sure. I know John will. I know John Sir will. So I would think that like that thing that runs parallel with Les Paul is the thing that runs with Ed Van Halen. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've had one of those since.
Maybe until Andy Wood.
You got to cut on that because that's the worst BS I've ever heard. I'm just some redneck mandolin player that likes to play with too much distortion. That's my story.
I'll tell you this, man. You're somebody that has made a wildly admirable career out of the things that you've been passionate about, and I feel so privileged that you came to spend some time with me.
It was great, man.
And I love nerding out with you, and I sure appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
A little housekeeping, if we can.
Let's do it.
The Andy Wood Musics they're andywoodmusic.com, Andy Wood Music on all the social medias, woodshedguitarexperience.com for signing up for the camp. We only have a couple of slots left, so I don't know when this is going to air. We don't have a lot of slots left. Interested in that, go hit that, patreon.com/andywoodmusic. That's my spiel, just so you can get in touch with me.
Andy Wood, everybody.
Cheers, guys.